Let's take a more in-depth look at adding melee weapons by adding the sword and then also punching and kicking. For this video, I'm going to assume that you've already watched the item types and the items video, so if you haven't already done so, make sure you watch those videos first. So I have the character here and I've removed all the weapons from him, so when I hit play, you'll notice that he has absolutely no weapons at all. So let's change that by adding the sword. We can do that through the item manager, and we'll add the sword as the name using the sword item type. We're going to assign it to the Nolan character, and the sword has an animator item ID of 22. Let me actually just verify that. Yes, that's right. The first person base object should be first person arms, and I've already separated out these arms, so I just drag them in, and the arms have a first person demo animator controller. The actual model file is sword, and it will be parented to the arm's right hand, and that needs an item slot, so we'll just go ahead and add that item slot. And then the sword actually doesn't have an animator controller because the actual sword metal object does not animate at all, so we'll leave that empty. Under the visible item, we'll have a similar setup. We'll use the sword model file. It'll be in the character's right hand, and it'll have no animator controller. The action type should be melee, and the melee does not consume any item type, so we'll leave that blank. We're going to leave state configuration and state profile as is, but if, for example, we had this set to sword, what this would do is it would take these sword pre-configured values and apply it to this new sword item. And this will transfer all the default values as well as any states. And this is extremely useful if you already have a set of values that you like and you want to apply it to a new item. So it allows you to get up and running really quickly. But we want to show setting everything up, so I'm going to leave it as none and hit build item. So now we have sword in the character's hand. If I hit play, we'll be able to see the sword in both first and third person. But the sword isn't positioned correctly in the character's hand, so we're going to change that by clicking on the sword model, and then I have these values that already work well for the sword, so I'm just going to paste them in. I'm going to do the same for third person, or for first person, and now when I hit play, we'll notice that the sword is parented correctly, or positioned correctly. The next thing that we're going to do is, if we switch to third person, we can see it easiest, but you'll notice when he's aiming, he'd hit the base, his feet they don't really look like he's holding a sword. So we're going to get him more in an aiming stance by changing the movement set ID, and this ID is used within the animator to know, hey, that this happens to have a movement set ID of 1, so these feet should be spread out more, and so that looks a little bit better, or that looks a lot better for holding the sword and like ready to attack. So that looks good. What we're going to change now relates to the first person view, and if I go back into it, you'll notice under the arms, if I click on this pivot position, it's near the camera right now, but we want the sword to look like it has some weight, so we want to change the pivot position to be around this area. And we can do that by modifying the position offset on the first person perspective item. So I'm going to click on sword, scroll down to the perspective item, and these are the values that I'm using within the demo scene, but this is set in the rest position of the sword. And then the exit offset specifies the position that the sword should move to when I'm unequipping the sword, and that's a value of negative 0.4, and then it has a negative value of 0.05 and negative 0.2. So what this will do is it will move the sword from a little bit higher to lower on the y-axis and the z-axis as well for when the sword should be unequipping. We're going to change this rotation exit offset to be a little bit more extreme, so it rotates more when it's unequipping. And then this pivot position we want to change so that it is closer to the actual character's sword. And so now when I hit play, we should notice the pivot position change, and it's closer to the actual sword model file. So now if I click on the arms pivot, yeah, so there's the pivot. So now when I rotate, it looks like the sword has a little bit more weight to it. So that looks good, and actually let's try attacking to see what happens. If I hit attack, we'll notice that he actually gets stuck and he just keeps playing the same attack animation. We want to change that, and we can do so within these animator audio states. Let's scroll down to the melee weapon, and we'll notice that it has a state of just 2 right now. And what this means is that this item substate index within the animator will always have a value of 2 when he's attacking. Well, we want to have a little bit more variety, so let's add a new one and have a value of 3. The animator has already been set up so that it knows that if the item substate index is 2, it should play this attack animation. Otherwise, if it's 3, it should play a different attack animation. And let's change this selector to sequence. So instead of it randomly selecting one or the other, it will always go 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3. So now when I hit play and I try to attack, we should notice that it will always play 1, then the other, 1, then the other, 1, then the other. So that looks a lot better. Gives a lot more variety. The last thing that I want to do is add an item trail or a melee trail to the sword. And this gives it a neat little effect for showing that, hey, the sword is in motion. And we can do that by specifying the trail game object. And I've already created a trail for the sword. And we can, if we didn't have one created, we could create one through this object manager and select melee trail. But we already have one created, so we're just going to use that. We want the trail to be visible when the character is attacking, and now we need to specify a location that the trail will play from. And we can do that. We need to do that in both perspectives, but it will be a child of the sword. So let's specify trail, and I'm going to cheat again by looking up what values I used in the demo scene so that I can get a similar set of values. And I had this value, basically a y value of -0.95. I'm going to do something similar for third person as well. So let me click on the third person sword, and then I'm going to create an empty game object, and I'm going to call it trail and have a value of -0.95. Now I need to specify that value, or that game object, and I can do that within the sword melee perspective properties, weapon properties, and it asks for a trail location. This one is for first person, so let me drag in the first person trail location, and then for third person I need to drag in the third person trail location. So now when I hit play, we should see a melee trail follow the sword. So there we go. Looks pretty good. You can even see it better in third person. Cool. So that's how you set up the sword. It's now time to add the body item. The body item will allow us to punch and kick with the character. This is a little bit of an interesting use case because it doesn't have any actual visible item. Instead, the punching and kicking is actually on the character, so you don't need to physically equip or unequip a weapon. To get started, we still go through the item manager, and I got that open, so I'm going to start by typing the name as body, and this is just kind of a generic name that will allow him to both punch and kick. We're going to drag in the character. The body has a unique animator ID of 21, and we can leave the base as it is and then also leave visible item empty. And we're leaving these visible items empty for both first and third person because the character already has his fist and already has his feet on him, so he doesn't need to actually equip or unequip an item. The action type is melee weapon, and it does not consume anything, and we're going to leave the state configuration and profile as the defaults. So let's go ahead and build the item, and now we have the body item type. You'll notice that there isn't a physical change to them, but that's just because, again, there's no actual model representation by the body. So when I hit play, if I'm going to start off with the sword still, but I can hit the E key, which will toggle to the next item, and you'll notice that nothing appears, and that's because the body is being equipped. We actually don't want the body to be equipped when we hit the E key, so we're going to go to the item set manager and click on body, and we're going to change this so default is checked, and we're going to disable Can Switch To. By disabling Can Switch To, it will prevent the equip next and equip previous abilities from switching to this item set. By having default checked, it allows the item set to be selected when I toggle the item, which I can toggle the item with the T key. That plays the toggle equip ability. One more thing that I'm going to do related to equip unequip is I'm going to change the equip event to not wait for an animation and just have a 0 duration for both equip and equip complete. What this says is the equip event allows the item to know when it's actually equipped, and then equip complete allows it to know when the animation is done being played for equip. So if we set it both to 0 and waiting on no animation events for this, then it will be equipped immediately and we won't have to wait on anything. We're going to do the same thing with unequip. So now when I hit play and I hit the T key, we should see that the sword disappears and the body appears, and a good way to, or an easy way to test this is by just right clicking, and he should start aiming by putting his fist up. So there we go. We do have the body animation, and we can do that in third person as well. Oops, sorry, hit the T key. Let's do that in third person. So yeah, we do have the body equipped now. The next thing that we want to do is set up hit points for the colliders for the body, because right now if he's attacking, he doesn't actually do anything, or he doesn't actually collide with anything because there's no colliders on him. We can do that by going to the fist or the hand and adding, I'm going to add a fist collider, and I'm going to do that by creating an empty child game object, name it fist, and then I'm going to add a sphere collider. The sphere collider doesn't need to be this big to represent the fist, so I just made it 0.1, and then I'm going to move it down on the character's arm a bit just so that it's more covering his actual fist area. So this is the fist for his right arm for third person. Let's just duplicate that and move it to be underneath his left arm, and let's actually rename it to be left fist and right fist so that we can distinguish between it when we're adding it to a list. I'm going to paste the values, so now we have it in his right hand. This is for, or his left hand, sorry. This is for his third person view. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for first person view, and that's under first person objects, and then we'll scroll down under his hand right. We'll add, actually what's under his hand left, we'll add the left fist, and we'll just paste the values so that it moves to be in the correct position. Let's double click on that to see, yeah, that looks good. And now let's duplicate it one more time, and now it'll be positioned under his right hand, and we'll paste the component values again and rename it to right fist. So now we have the collider set up for the fist. Let's go ahead and set it up for the legs just so that we get everything set up before we actually assign it. I'm going to go to the legs underneath the character's third person rig, and I'm going to create a new child, and I'm going to call this leg. Instead of a sphere collider, this is better represented with a box collider. So let's go ahead and add that. And then we definitely don't need it to be that big, so I'm going to look at what values I used in the demo scene and adjust it based on that. So this is what I used. So it looks a little bit better. It looks like I need to change the rotation and the position to get it to align correctly. So let's do that. 1, 2 zeros. Now we can change the rotation. It looks like what needs to be changed, because that's not actually on the fist. Am I underneath? Oh, I see. Okay, let me just copy these values. When I positioned the leg, I was underneath the shin rather than the foot. So there, now that looks good. Let's go ahead and duplicate that and put it under the shin on the right leg. And let's see if we paste the same values, if it will look good. Yeah, all right, cool. Let's rename this to be right leg, and then rename this to be left leg. And now that we've created the colliders, let's go ahead and assign it within the body item. We can do that by scrolling to the bottom and noticing these first-person melee weapon properties and third-person melee weapon properties. So this asks for the hitbox for the first-person view, and there will be 4 of them for the 2 arms and 2 legs, so I'll just create those 4. The first thing that I want to do is assign left fist, then right fist, and I'm making sure I'm under the first-person objects. Third person, there are no actual third-person feet. So, for first person, there are no first-person feet, so I'm going to use the first person or the third person feet. And you'll notice that when I assign it, there's a little yellow gizmo, and this just indicates that it's hooked up correctly. For the feet, I want the feet to be a little bit more powerful when it actually collides and hits an object compared to the feet or to the fist. So I'm going to set the damage multiplier to 1.5. So now when the legs make contact with a collider, it will apply a multiplier of 1.5 to the damage amount. So it's a little bit more powerful compared to the fist. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for a third person view. For a third person, we're going to need a different fist, and those fists will be the ones that are actually on the third person rig, but we'll be able to use the same leg colliders. So let's still apply more of a multiplier for the legs. And now you'll see that we have first and third person colliders set up. Now when I hit play, we should see that when we switch to it, and we'll see that he starts to punch. He only punches once though, or he only has 1 animation for punching. So let's go ahead and change that. And this is similar to what we did with the sword, where under the animator item states, the animator audio states, right now it only has a value of 2, but we want to have values 2, 3, and 4. And the animator is set up to be able to accept 3 different values. So now when I switch, let's actually switch to third person just so we can see it in that. When I switch to this, he should punch with his right fist, punch with his left fist, and then kick. Oh, it looks like he kicked. Oh, actually, the reason why he did that is because I have the selector set to random. I want it to be sequenced, so now it goes 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4. So we'll switch now, right punch, left punch, kick. And the same thing should happen in first person view. So that looks good. So that's how you set up punching and kicking.